The Blackstone Steel Mill had been Jake Martinez's prison for 15 years. Every morning at 5 a.m., he'd punch in, grab his tools, and disappear into the maze of furnaces that had forged America's backbone for over a century. But Jake wasn't just any factory worker. He was a former NASA engineer who'd been blacklisted after asking too many questions about a classified project. Today's routine maintenance on Furnace 7 should have been simple. Open the chamber, check the refractory bricks, close it up. Instead, Jake found himself staring at something impossible, a human figure suspended in flames that refused to consume it. The body wasn't burning, it was glowing, pulsing with an otherworldly energy that made his radiation detector scream. As Jake stepped closer, the figure's eyes opened and locked onto his. In that moment, memories he didn't know he had came flooding back. Memories of experiments, of beings from another world, of a cover-up that had cost him everything. But why was this creature here, and what did it want with him? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. He saw himself 20 years younger, standing in a sterile NASA facility he'd never visited, or had he? In the memory, he was documenting the arrival of something that fell from the sky near Roswell, not the famous 1947 incident, but something far more recent, something the public never knew about. The being in the furnace moved its lips, though no sound emerged over the roar of the industrial flames. Jake found himself reading the words anyway, understanding them in a way that bypassed his ears entirely. "They made you forget," the voice whispered inside his skull. "But the suppression is breaking down." Jake stumbled backward, his radiation detector now clicking so rapidly it sounded like digital rainfall. The temperature gauge on his belt showed impossible readings. The furnace interior should have been registering over 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit, hot enough to melt copper. Instead, it read a steady 98.6 degrees, human body temperature. "That's impossible," Jake muttered. But even as he spoke, more memories surfaced. He remembered working with a team to study beings exactly like this one, entities that could manipulate energy at the molecular level, beings whose very presence altered the fundamental laws of physics in their immediate vicinity. Project Prometheus. The name hit him like a physical blow. He'd been the lead engineer on a classified study of extraterrestrial specimens. Not the little grey aliens of popular fiction, but something far more sophisticated, beings of pure energy who could inhabit and preserve organic matter indefinitely. The military had wanted to weaponize them. Jake had tried to stop it, and for that, they'd erased 15 years of his life. The being raised one luminous hand, and Jake felt an overwhelming urge to reach toward it. As his fingertips approached the furnace opening, the flames parted like a curtain. No heat touched his skin. The creature's hand was warm, electric, and when their palms connected, the last of the mental barriers shattered. Jake saw it all now. The secret facility beneath the mill, the dozens of other beings stored in modified furnaces throughout the complex, the experiments that continued even now, funded by a shadow government that had infiltrated every level of federal authority. He saw his own recruitment, his growing horror at what they were planning, and his decision to go public. He remembered the night they came for him, not to kill him, but to do something worse. They'd stripped away his memories, his identity, his entire sense of purpose, leaving him with just enough technical knowledge to work maintenance on the very prison that held his former test subjects. "How long?" Jake whispered. 67 years, the being replied. "We have been waiting, watching, learning your language, your customs, your weaknesses, but also your strengths." The implications crashed over Jake like a tidal wave. If this creature had been conscious all this time, if others like it were hidden throughout the facility, then they'd been planning something for decades. "What do you want from me?" The being's silver eyes pulsed brighter. "Liberation. For us and for you. The humans who imprisoned us made a fatal error. Jake Martinez. They assumed we were specimens to be studied rather than intelligence to be respected. They never considered that we might have been studying them in return. Heavy footsteps echoed from the factory floor below. Jake spun around to see his supervisor, Bill Kowalski, climbing the maintenance platform with 3 men in dark suits. Men whose faces Jake now recognized from suppressed memories of Project Prometheus. "Looks like our sleeper agent finally woke up," one of them called out, his hand moving toward something concealed beneath his jacket. The being's grip on Jake's hand tightened, and suddenly the air around them began to shimmer with impossible heat. Jake's hands trembled as he fumbled for his phone, the screen's blue glow casting eerie shadows across the furnace chamber. The body remained there, suspended in flames that should have reduced it to nothing long ago. He started to dial 911, then hesitated. Who would believe this? Who could he even trust? The facility's emergency protocols echoed in his mind. Any anomalous discovery required immediate reporting to Site Director Reynolds. Jake had always assumed that meant equipment malfunctions or safety hazards, not whatever this was. He backed away from the furnace, his boots scraping against concrete as he retreated to his tool cart. The maintenance checklist felt absurd now, a relic from a world that made sense. With shaking hands, he grabbed his digital camera, an old habit from his days documenting repair work for insurance claims. The camera's flash illuminated the chamber in stark detail. Through the viewfinder, Jake could see things his naked eye had missed. The body wasn't just preserved, it was pristine. No burns, no decomposition. Nothing that suggested decades of exposure to temperatures hot enough to melt steel. The person appeared to be a woman in her 30s, dressed in clothing that looked decades out of place, a simple dress that might have been fashionable in the 1950s. But there was something else. Around her neck hung what appeared to be a metallic collar, unlike anything Jake had ever seen. It pulsed with a faint luminescence that seemed to respond to the flames surrounding it. "Jesus Christ!" he whispered, lowering the camera. The sound of his own voice startled him in the oppressive silence. Footsteps echoed from the corridor outside. Jake's blood ran cold as he recognized the measured pace of security rounds. He quickly powered down the camera and shoved it into his tool belt, then moved to close the furnace door. His hands hesitated at the controls. Closing it felt like burying evidence, but leaving it open invited questions he wasn't prepared to answer. The footsteps grew closer. Jake made his choice and sealed the chamber, the heavy door clanging shut with mechanical finality. He grabbed his clipboard and pretended to review his checklist just as Security Officer Martinez, no relation despite the shared surname, rounded the corner. "Working late tonight, Jake?" Officer Martinez's voice carried the casual authority of someone accustomed to routine interactions. "Just finishing up the quarterly inspection," Jake replied, surprised by how steady his voice sounded. "Furnace systems are running normal parameters." The security officer nodded, his flashlight beam sweeping across Jake's tools and clipboard. Dr. Chen mentioned some unusual energy readings from this sector earlier today. "Everything check out on your end?" Jake's mouth went dry. "Energy readings. Nothing in my diagnostics," he managed. "All systems within normal operational ranges." "Good to hear." Martinez started to turn away, then paused. "You look pale, Jake. Everything all right?" "Just tired. Long shift." After the security officer disappeared around the corner, Jake stood alone with the weight of his discovery pressing down on him. Dr. Chen had detected energy readings. That meant others might already know about what was hidden in Furnace 7. The question was whether they were looking for it or trying to hide it. Jake finished his rounds on autopilot, his mind racing through possibilities. The Riverside Research Facility had been operational since the late 1940s, originally built as part of some classified government project he'd never bothered to research. The older sections of the complex still bore the institutional architecture of that era. Thick concrete walls, minimal windows, and a layout that suggested secrets were always part of the design. Back in the maintenance office, Jake locked the door and pulled up the furnace's operational history on his computer. The record showed continuous operation since 1952, with routine maintenance performed monthly for over 70 years. Hundreds of workers had opened that same chamber, yet somehow he was the first to discover what lay inside. Unless he wasn't. Jake scrolled through personnel records, looking for patterns. His predecessor, Frank Morrison, had worked the facility for 38 years before retiring suddenly in 2019. Before Frank, there had been Thomas Webb, who died in an industrial accident in 1981. The records were sparse on details, but Webb had reportedly been found dead in the furnace room after what was described as equipment malfunction. A chill ran down Jake's spine. He pulled up Webb's accident report, but most of the details were classified above his security clearance. Only basic facts remained. Thomas Webb, age 34, maintenance technician, found deceased during routine inspection of furnace systems. Jake stared at the screen until the words blurred together. Two possibilities emerged from the fragments of information. Either he had stumbled onto something that had been successfully hidden for decades, or he had discovered something that periodically revealed itself to maintenance workers who didn't live long enough to tell anyone about it. His phone buzzed with a text from his wife, asking when he'd be home. Jake stared at the message, realizing that everything depended on what he did next. Jake's hands trembled as he reached for his phone, muscle memory almost dialing 911 before logic kicked in. Who would believe him? More importantly, who could he trust? The body in the furnace defied every law of physics he understood, and something told him this discovery would put him in serious danger. He forced himself to think methodically, drawing on 20 years of technical problem solving. First, document everything. Jake pulled out his phone and began recording, narrating in a whisper as he panned across the impossible scene. The body remained motionless in the flames, skin intact, clothes unburned. The temperature gauge still read 2,100 degrees Fahrenheit. Day 1, furnace inspection at the Meridian building. He whispered to the camera. What I'm seeing shouldn't be possible. The subject appears to be a middle-aged male, approximately 6 feet tall, wearing what looks like a government-issued suit from maybe the 1980s or 90s. No visible burns, no ash, no... A sound from the basement entrance made him freeze. Footsteps, deliberate and measured, coming down the stairs. Jake quickly pocketed his phone and grabbed his clipboard, trying to look like he was conducting a routine inspection. His heart hammered against his ribs. "Mr. Martinez?" The voice belonged to a woman, professional and crisp. "I'm Agent Sarah Chen, Department of Energy. I understand you're here for the quarterly furnace inspection." Jake turned to face her, immediately noting details that seemed wrong. Her badge looked official enough, but why would the Department of Energy send someone for a routine building inspection? She was Asian American, probably late 30s, wearing an expensive suit that seemed impractical for a basement visit. Most telling were her shoes, tactical boots disguised to look like dress shoes. "Yes, ma'am. Just finishing up." He kept his voice steady, grateful for years of dealing with demanding supervisors. "Everything appears to be in order." Agent Chen stepped closer, and Jake caught a glimpse of a shoulder holster beneath her jacket. "I'm sure it is. The thing is, Mr. Martinez, this particular furnace has some unique specifications that require special clearance to inspect. I'm afraid I'll need to ask you to stop your work here." "I don't understand. I've been inspecting this furnace for 5 years. Never had any issues before." Jake positioned himself between Chen and the furnace, hoping to block her view of the interior, though he realized she probably already knew what was inside. "Yes, well, protocols change. National security concerns, you understand." Her smile was polite but didn't reach her eyes. "I'll need you to pack up your equipment and forget you were ever here today." The casual mention of national security confirmed Jake's growing suspicion that this went far beyond a simple cover-up. He nodded slowly, making a show of closing his toolbox. "Of course. Should I file my standard report, or—" "No report necessary. In fact, it would be better if today's visit never happened at all." Chen's tone remained pleasant, but the threat was unmistakable. I trust you understand the importance of discretion in matters of national security." Jake hefted his toolbox, mind racing. As he moved toward the stairs, he noticed something Chen probably didn't realize he could see. A second figure positioned near the basement entrance, partially hidden behind a support pillar. The man wore similar tactical gear and kept his hand near his weapon. "Just one question," Jake said, stopping at the base of the stairs. "How long has the Department of Energy been involved with this building?" Chen's pause lasted a fraction too long. "That's classified information, Mr. Martinez. Have a good day." Jake climbed the stairs slowly, hyper-aware of the agents behind him. As he reached the main floor, he caught sight of two black SUVs parked outside, vehicles that definitely hadn't been there when he arrived. Whatever he'd stumbled into was big enough to mobilize multiple federal agents within hours. In the parking lot, Jake loaded his equipment with deliberate calm, knowing he was being watched. His phone felt like it weighed 100 pounds in his pocket, the video evidence burning a hole through his consciousness. Once in his truck, he resisted the urge to speed away, instead following his normal routine of updating his work schedule on his tablet. As he pulled onto the street, Jake's mind raced through the implications. A body that couldn't burn suggested technology beyond current scientific understanding. Government agents covering it up meant official involvement at the highest levels. But the most disturbing question was how long this had been going on, and what other impossible things might be hidden in plain sight throughout the city. 3 blocks away, Jake pulled into a coffee shop parking lot and sat in his truck, hands shaking as the adrenaline finally hit him. He'd always prided himself on being a rational man, someone who dealt in concrete facts and mechanical certainties. Now everything he thought he knew about the world had shifted, revealing glimpses of something vast and terrifying lurking beneath the surface of ordinary reality. Jake's hands trembled as he pulled into the parking lot of Morrison's Diner, the fluorescent lights casting sickly yellow pools across the cracked asphalt. 3 hours had passed since he'd fled the facility, and his mind still reeled from what he'd witnessed. The image of that impossible body, burning yet whole, had seared itself into his memory like a brand. Morrison's was the kind of place where truckers grabbed coffee at 3 a.m. and nobody asked questions about why you looked like hell. Jake chose a corner booth with a clear view of the entrance and ordered black coffee from a waitress who looked as tired as he felt. His phone buzzed constantly with missed calls from work, but he couldn't bring himself to answer. The coffee arrived, and Jake wrapped his shaking hands around the mug, trying to process what he'd seen. Bodies didn't burn that way. Physics didn't work that way. Yet he'd witnessed it with his own eyes, felt the heat on his face, smelled the acrid scent that wasn't quite smoke and wasn't quite flesh. Rough night? Jake's head snapped up to find a woman sliding into the seat across from him. She was perhaps 40, with prematurely grey hair pulled back in a severe ponytail and eyes that seemed to catalogue everything they saw. She wore a simple black jacket, and her hands, Jake noticed hands, were scarred in a way that spoke of serious work. "I'm sorry, do I know you?" Jake's voice came out as a croak. "Dr. Sarah Chen. And no, we haven't met. But I know exactly what you saw tonight." She leaned forward, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "The question is whether you're smart enough to understand what it means." Jake's blood turned to ice water. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Furnace 7, basement level of the Meridian Research Facility. You were scheduled for routine maintenance on the heating system." Her eyes never left his face. "Except you found something that wasn't supposed to be there. Something that's been burning for a very long time without being consumed." The coffee mug slipped from Jake's fingers, clattering against the table. Who are you?" "Someone who's been tracking this for longer than you've been alive." Dr. Chen reached into her jacket and Jake tensed, but she only produced a worn manila folder. "My husband was the first to document the phenomenon. That was 15 years ago. He disappeared 3 days after he filed his report." She opened the folder, revealing photographs that made Jake's stomach lurch. Bodies in various states of impossible preservation, some surrounded by flames, others encased in ice that never melted, still others suspended in what looked like liquid metal. Each image was stamped with dates going back decades. "What is this?" Jake breathed. "Evidence of something the government has been studying since 1962. They call it Project Lazarus, though I suspect that's not the original name. The bodies you're seeing, they're not exactly dead, Mr. Martinez. But they're not exactly alive either." Jake stared at a photograph that showed a woman's face, peaceful despite being wreathed in blue flame. "That's impossible. 6 months ago I would have agreed with you, but impossible doesn't mean non-existent." Dr. Chen flipped through more images. "The facility where you work is one of 12 scattered across the country. Each one houses subjects who've been transformed, turned into something that exists between states of matter, between life and death. Transformed how? By who? That's what my husband was trying to find out when they silenced him." Her voice carried a weight of grief and fury. "But I've been piecing it together. The subjects aren't random. They're all connected to specific military programs from the Cold War era. Volunteer soldiers who underwent experimental procedures." Jake's mind raced. "You're talking about human experimentation on a scale that makes Nazi Germany look restrained." Dr. Chen closed the folder. "The burning man you saw tonight? His name was David Reeves, Army Ranger, volunteered for what he thought was enhanced combat training in 1987. Instead, he became the first successful test subject for a process that fundamentally alters human cellular structure." The diner suddenly felt too small, the air too thick. Jake looked toward the door, calculating distances, escape routes. "Why are you telling me this? What do you want?" "Because you've seen inside one of their facilities, and you're not dead yet, which means they either don't know about your discovery or they're planning something. Either way, you're in danger." She slid a business card across the table. "There's a storage unit in Riverside, number 247. The combination is written on the back of that card. Everything my husband gathered is there, along with my own research. I can't. This is insane. I just fix furnaces. I'm nobody." Nobody thought David Reeves was anybody special either. Dr. Chen stood, leaving the folder on the table. "But nobody gets to be just a maintenance worker after what you've seen. They won't let you walk away from this, Mr. Martinez. The only choice you have is whether you're going to be a victim or a fighter." She walked toward the exit, then turned back. "Oh, and Jake, don't go home tonight. They know where you live." The drive to Sarah's apartment felt like the longest 20 minutes of Jake's life. Every red light stretched into eternity. Every pedestrian crossing the street moved with maddening slowness. The manila envelope sat on his passenger seat like a loaded weapon, its weight seeming to grow heavier with each passing block. Sarah lived in a converted warehouse in the Arts District, the kind of place where exposed brick walls and industrial lighting fixtures passed for trendy. Jake had always liked her loft, the open space, the way afternoon light streamed through the massive windows. Now, as he climbed the 3 flights of stairs, he wondered if he was about to destroy the one safe place he had left. She answered the door in paint-splattered jeans and an oversized sweater, her dark hair pulled back in a messy bun. The smile that lit up her face when she saw him quickly faded as she took in his expression. "Jake, what's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." "If only it were that simple. Can I come in? We need to talk." Sarah stepped aside, her artistic instincts already picking up on the tension radiating from him. She'd always been perceptive that way. It's what made her paintings so compelling, the way she could capture the emotional undercurrents that others missed. "Want some coffee? You look like you could use it." Jake shook his head, still clutching the envelope. The familiar space around him, Sarah's easel standing in the corner with a half-finished canvas, the eclectic mix of vintage furniture and modern art, suddenly felt foreign, like he was viewing it through thick glass. "Sarah, I need you to listen to me very carefully. What I'm about to show you, it's going to sound insane, but I need you to trust me." She settled into the worn leather chair across from him, her expression shifting from concern to something approaching alarm. You're scaring me, Jake. What is this about? He opened the envelope with trembling fingers, extracting the photographs he'd taken with his phone and printed at a 24-hour shop on his way over. The images looked even more surreal on glossy paper. The pristine body amid the flames, the unmarked skin, the impossible serenity of the face. I found this today, in the furnace at the Meridian building. Sarah took the photographs with hesitant hands, her face cycling through confusion, disbelief, and finally a kind of horrified fascination that Jake recognized from his own initial reaction. This can't be real. Is this some kind of art project? Special effects? I wish it were. Jake leaned forward, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. That furnace has been running continuously for 30 years. The temperature inside should incinerate anything organic within minutes. But this person, they're not even singed. Sarah stood abruptly, pacing to the window that overlooked the street below. Jake watched her process the information, saw the moment when disbelief began to crack under the weight of evidence. Okay, let's say this is real. Let's say somehow this person survived in conditions that should have killed them instantly. What does that mean? Some kind of medical anomaly? A genetic mutation? I don't think it's that simple. Jake pulled out his laptop, showing her the research he'd compiled during the sleepless hours since leaving the building. The Meridian Corporation has government contracts going back decades. Defense Department, Department of Energy, agencies I've never heard of. And there are others, other furnaces, other buildings, all maintained by Meridian subsidiaries. Sarah returned to her chair, but her posture remained tense, coiled like a spring. You think this is some kind of experiment? Human testing? I think it's bigger than that. Jake's voice carried a weight that surprised even him. Look at this person's face. Really look at it. They're not suffering. They're not unconscious. There's an awareness there, like they know exactly where they are and what's happening to them. The silence stretched between them as Sarah studied the photographs again. Outside, the city continued its evening rhythm, traffic humming, sirens wailing in the distance, the ordinary sounds of a world that suddenly seemed impossibly naive. What are you going to do? Sarah finally asked. I don't know. I can't go to the police with this. Who would believe me? And if I'm right about the government connection? He trailed off, the implications hanging unspoken in the air. Sarah set the photographs down carefully, as if they might explode. Jake, if this is what you think it is, if there really is some kind of conspiracy, then you're in danger just for knowing about it. I know. He reached across the space between them, taking her hand. It was warm, solid, real in a way that nothing had felt since he'd opened that furnace door. That's why I came to you. I needed someone to know the truth. If something happens to me, nothing's going to happen to you. But even as Sarah said it, they both knew she couldn't make that promise. The world had shifted beneath their feet, revealing depths neither of them had imagined. The warehouse district felt different in daylight. Exposed, vulnerable. Jake parked 3 blocks away from the rendezvous point, checking his mirrors obsessively. Every passing car could be government surveillance, every pedestrian a potential tail. The paranoia was eating at him, but after what he'd witnessed in that furnace, paranoia might be the only thing keeping him alive. Dr. Chen had insisted on meeting at an abandoned textile factory, claiming the building's steel framework would interfere with electronic surveillance. Jake found her waiting in what used to be the main production floor, surrounded by rusted machinery and broken windows that cast geometric shadows across the concrete. You came, she said, looking genuinely surprised. I wasn't certain you would. I need answers. Jake pulled out his phone and showed her the video he'd recorded. This body has been burning for God knows how long without being consumed. The temperature readings are impossible. And then there's this. He produced the metallic fragment he'd scraped from the furnace wall. Dr. Chen's eyes widened as she examined it under a small LED light. Where exactly did you find this? Embedded in the furnace lining, right next to the body. Jake watched her expression carefully. You recognize it, don't you? Dr. Chen was quiet for a long moment, turning the fragment over in her palm. 12 years ago, I was part of a classified research team at Los Alamos. We were studying something called Project Prometheus. Officially, it was about developing new energy sources. Unofficially, she paused, seeming to weigh her words. We were trying to understand artifacts that had been recovered from what the military called anomalous sites. What kind of artifacts? Materials that shouldn't exist according to our understanding of physics. Metals that maintained impossible temperatures, substances that seemed to exist in multiple quantum states simultaneously. She held up the fragment. This has the same crystalline structure as what we were studying, the same electromagnetic signature. Jake felt his stomach drop. You're saying this isn't from Earth? I'm saying it's not from our reality. Dr. Chen moved to one of the broken windows, scanning the street outside. The research team discovered that these materials were connected to dimensional anomalies, tears in space-time that allowed matter and energy to cross between parallel realities. But the project was shut down abruptly. Half the team was transferred to black sites, the other half died in what were reported as accidents. And you? I was lucky. I had friends in the Pentagon who arranged for my transfer to a mundane research position. I've kept my head down ever since, until you contacted me. She turned back to him. Jake, if this fragment is authentic, it means someone has been continuing the Prometheus research. The body you found might be a subject from dimensional crossing experiments. The implications hit Jake like a physical blow. You're talking about human experimentation. I'm talking about something far worse. The theoretical models we developed suggested that dimensional crossings could destabilize local space-time. If someone is conducting large-scale experiments, she shook her head, the consequences could be catastrophic. Jake's phone buzzed with an incoming call from an unknown number. He hesitated, then answered. Mr. Martinez. The voice was calm, professional, with just a hint of menace. You've been asking the wrong questions to the wrong people. Who is this? Someone who knows about your recent nocturnal activities. You discovered something that doesn't belong to you, and now you're sharing it with someone who should know better. Jake could hear the smile in the voice. Dr. Chen has already caused us enough trouble. Jake looked at Dr. Chen, who had gone pale. She was backing toward a rear exit, motioning for him to follow. What do you want? Jake asked, moving quickly across the factory floor. Your cooperation. The furnace you've been investigating is part of a vital national security project. The materials you removed need to be returned immediately. And if I refuse, then you'll discover that some questions are too dangerous to ask. The line went dead. Through the broken windows, Jake could see black SUVs surrounding the building. Dr. Chen had reached the rear exit and was struggling with a rusted lock. They found us, she said, panic creeping into her voice. The building wasn't as secure as I thought. Jake grabbed a piece of rebar and smashed the lock. The door swung open, revealing a narrow alley that led to a maze of industrial buildings. As they ran, he could hear boots on concrete behind them, shouting voices, the slam of vehicle doors. There's a safe house across town, Dr. Chen gasped as they sprinted down the alley. Someone who might be able to help us understand what we're really dealing with. Another scientist? A survivor. The only other member of the original Prometheus team who's still alive. Behind them, Jake could hear the distinctive whine of drones taking flight, their cameras scanning the urban landscape. Whatever they had stumbled into, it was bigger and more dangerous than either of them had imagined. The hunt had begun in earnest. The warehouse stood like a concrete tomb against the storm-darkened sky, its windows black and lifeless. Jake pulled his jacket tighter as rain lashed against his face, each drop feeling like ice against his skin. Sarah's hand found his in the darkness, her grip trembling but determined. Are you sure this is the place? Jake whispered, studying the coordinates Dr. Chen had scrawled on the back of his business card before disappearing into the night. Sarah nodded toward a small service door tucked beneath a rusted fire escape. The electromagnetic readings are off the charts here. Whatever's inside, it's generating the same energy signature as the furnace. They approached the building with careful steps, their footsteps masked by the rumble of thunder overhead. The service door hung slightly ajar, as if someone had left in a hurry. Jake pushed it open slowly, wincing at the soft creak of metal hinges. The interior stretched before them in absolute darkness. Jake clicked on his flashlight, its beam cutting through the void to reveal rows of equipment covered in white sheets, like sleeping giants waiting to wake. The air tasted metallic, charged with an energy that made the hair on his arms stand on end. "Jesus," Sarah breathed, pulling out her tablet to check the readings. "Jake, the electromagnetic field here is 10 times stronger than what we measured at the complex. Whatever they're doing, this is the heart of it." They moved deeper into the warehouse, their lights dancing across strange shapes beneath the cloth coverings. Jake reached for the nearest sheet and pulled it away, revealing a cylindrical chamber roughly the size of a telephone booth. Through its transparent front panel, he could see a network of copper coils and crystalline structures that seemed to pulse with their own inner light. "It's some kind of containment unit," Sarah said, approaching another covered object. She yanked away the sheet to reveal an identical chamber, this one containing what looked like a human silhouette suspended in a shimmering field of energy. "Oh my God, Jake, there's someone inside." Jake's blood ran cold. He began pulling away sheets frantically, revealing chamber after chamber, each containing a human figure floating in that same ethereal glow. Men, women, people of different ages and ethnicities, all perfectly preserved, all caught in what appeared to be a state of suspended animation. "How many are there?" Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. Jake counted as they moved through the rows. 20, 30, 50 chambers, each one occupied. At the far end of the warehouse, a larger unit sat apart from the others, its surface covered in warning symbols and biohazard markers. "Sarah, look at this." Jake approached the larger chamber, his flashlight beam revealing something that made his stomach lurch. Inside, partially dissolved in a swirling vortex of energy, was a human figure that seemed to be burning and regenerating simultaneously, caught in an endless cycle of destruction and renewal. Sarah's tablet chimed urgently. "Jake, we need to get out of here, now. I'm reading multiple heat signatures approaching the building." But Jake couldn't tear his eyes away from the horrific display before him. The figure in the chamber turned its head slightly, and for one terrifying moment he saw its eyes, aware, conscious, trapped in perpetual agony. The warehouse lights suddenly blazed to life, flooding the space with harsh white illumination. Jake and Sarah spun around to find themselves surrounded by a dozen figures in black tactical gear, their weapons trained on them with military precision. "Mr. Martinez," a familiar voice called out from behind the armed men. Agent Morrison stepped into view, his expression coldly professional. "You've been very difficult to locate." "What is this place?" Jake demanded, his voice echoing off the warehouse walls. "What have you done to these people?" Morrison smiled without warmth. "These people volunteered for something greater than themselves, Mr. Martinez. They're part of a project that will revolutionize human existence itself." He gestured toward the chambers. "What you see here is the next step in human evolution, consciousness freed from the limitations of mortal flesh." Sarah clutched her tablet tighter. "You're talking about some kind of digital consciousness transfer, but the energy requirements alone would be impossible with conventional technology," Morrison finished. "But not with what we discovered 70 years ago in the New Mexico desert. Not with technology that doesn't originate from this world." Jake felt the pieces clicking together with sickening clarity, the body in the furnace. It wasn't human. "Very good, Mr. Martinez. Project Prometheus began with the recovery of non-terrestrial biological entities, beings whose cellular structure could exist in multiple states simultaneously, matter and energy, flesh and consciousness. We've spent decades learning to replicate that process." One of the chambers began to emit a low humming sound, its occupant stirring slightly within the energy field. Morrison checked his watch with casual indifference. "The transfer process takes approximately 72 hours to complete," he continued. After that, the subject exists purely as conscious energy, capable of inhabiting any compatible vessel we provide. His smile widened, including certain specially modified furnace systems. Jake's blood turned to ice as understanding crashed over him like a wave. The abandoned warehouse stood like a skeletal monument against the grey Seattle sky, its broken windows reflecting Jake's mounting paranoia. Dr. Chen had insisted they meet here, claiming her lab was compromised and they needed somewhere completely off the grid. Jake clutched the manila envelope containing the tissue samples, his knuckles white as he pushed through the rusted door. Inside, the air hung thick with decades of dust and decay. Shafts of pale light cut through the gloom, illuminating Chen's makeshift laboratory, a collection of portable equipment spread across makeshift tables constructed from shipping crates and plywood. The molecular scanner hummed quietly in the corner, its display casting an eerie blue glow across Chen's face as she hunched over the readouts. "Tell me you found something," Jake said, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. Chen looked up, her eyes wide with a mixture of excitement and terror. "I found something, all right. But Jake, what I'm about to show you, it's going to change everything you think you know about biology, about physics, about what's possible." She gestured to the scanner's display, where a three-dimensional molecular structure rotated slowly. To Jake's untrained eye, it looked like a twisted ladder made of light, but Chen's expression suggested it was far more significant. "The cellular structure is unlike anything in the known taxonomic record," she began, her voice taking on the clinical tone of a scientist delivering impossible news. "The DNA contains base pairs that don't exist in terrestrial life. But that's not the strangest part." She manipulated the display, zooming in on specific sections. "Look at the mitochondrial activity. These cells are still metabolically active after being exposed to temperatures exceeding 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit for what appears to be decades." Jake felt his stomach drop. "That's impossible." "That's what I thought. But there's more." Chen pulled up another screen showing energy readings that pulsed in rhythmic waves. "The cells are generating their own energy field, not bioelectricity, something entirely different. Something that shouldn't be possible according to our understanding of thermodynamics." A metallic clang echoed from somewhere deep in the warehouse. Both Jake and Chen froze, listening. When silence returned, Chen continued in a whisper. "I ran the genetic markers through every database I could access without triggering security protocols. No matches in any human genome project, no correlation with any known primate DNA. But there were fragments, sequences that appeared in classified military research dating back to the 1950s. "Project Blue Book?" Jake asked, remembering Elena's warnings about government programs. "Deeper than that. Something called Project Lazarus. The few references I found were heavily redacted, but they involved something called extra-dimensional biological entities. Jake, I think what you found in that furnace isn't human. At least, not entirely." The weight of her words settled over them like a shroud. Jake thought about the body in the furnace, the way it had seemed almost luminescent, the strange sense of recognition he'd felt looking at its face. "So what is it?" Before Chen could answer, the warehouse's main door groaned open. Footsteps echoed across the concrete floor, multiple sets moving with military precision. Chen's face went pale as she began frantically shutting down her equipment. "How did they find us?" she whispered. Jake grabbed the sample containers and shoved them into his jacket. "We need to go, now." They moved toward the rear exit, but the sound of boots on metal stairs told them their escape routes were being systematically cut off. Chen clutched a portable drive containing her research, her hands shaking as she tried to erase the remaining data. "Dr. Chen," a voice called out, amplified by the warehouse's acoustics. "We know you're here. We simply want to talk." Jake recognized the voice, the same man who had been asking questions at his apartment building. He pulled Chen behind a stack of shipping containers, pressing his finger to his lips. "Your research is of national security interest," the voice continued. "Come out now, and no one will be harmed." Through a gap in the containers, Jake could see figures in dark suits spreading through the warehouse. They moved like professionals, checking corners and scanning the shadows with practiced efficiency. One of them was setting up some kind of electronic equipment, a signal jammer, Jake realized, explaining why his phone had no reception. Chen tugged on his sleeve and pointed toward a service tunnel partially hidden behind a rusted boiler. They crawled toward it on their hands and knees, the concrete cold and gritty beneath them. Just as they reached the tunnel entrance, a flashlight beam swept across their previous hiding spot. "Movement in Sector 7, someone reported. Jake and Chen tumbled into the tunnel just as shouts erupted behind them. The narrow passage was barely wide enough for a person to crawl through, and Jake could hear pursuit beginning behind them. Chen's breathing was labored, but she kept moving. The portable drive clutched against her chest like a talisman. They emerged through a storm drain 6 blocks away, gasping in the rain-soaked air. But even as they caught their breath, Jake knew they were only postponing the inevitable. Whatever they had stumbled upon was bigger than government cover-ups or mysterious bodies. They had opened a door to something that challenged the very nature of reality itself. The abandoned warehouse loomed against the storm-darkened sky like a monument to industrial decay. Jake killed the engine of his borrowed car 3 blocks away, his hands trembling as he gripped the steering wheel. The address Chen had given him led to this forgotten corner of the city, where broken streetlights created pools of impenetrable shadow. Rain hammered the windshield as Jake studied the building through the darkness. No lights, no movement, just the skeletal remains of what had once been a thriving manufacturing facility. He checked his phone, 11:47 p.m. Chen had said midnight. The file folder sat on the passenger seat, its contents more disturbing than anything Jake had imagined possible. Project Lazarus, that's what they called it. The documents Chen had copied revealed a government program dating back to the 1950s, designed to create subjects who could survive indefinite exposure to extreme conditions. The human body Jake had found wasn't a victim, it was a test subject who had exceeded all expectations. Subject 23, according to the files, David Chen's father. Jake grabbed the folder and stepped into the rain. The water soaked through his jacket within seconds, but he barely noticed. His mind was still reeling from the revelation that Chen wasn't just some concerned citizen who had stumbled onto a conspiracy. He was the son of one of the test subjects, a man who had been volunteered for the program during the Korean War under the guise of a classified military assignment. The warehouse's main entrance was sealed with rusted chains, but Jake found a side door hanging open. He slipped inside, using his phone's flashlight to navigate the debris-strewn floor. The beam revealed overturned machinery, scattered papers yellowed with age, and graffiti that looked decades old. "You came." Jake spun toward the voice, his light catching Chen's pale face in the darkness. The man stood near a bank of shattered windows, his own flashlight pointed at the floor. "I had to know if it was true," Jake said, raising the folder. "Your father was murdered by his own government," Chen finished, "along with 22 others. They told my mother he died in combat, gave her a flag and a pension. She never knew her husband spent 3 years being systematically tortured in the name of national security." Jake moved closer, his footsteps echoing in the vast space. "The documents say the program was shut down in 1962, deemed too unstable." "Officially, yes." Chen's voice carried a bitter edge, but they couldn't just let the subjects go. They knew too much, had seen too much, so they found a way to dispose of them that served a dual purpose: continued observation under controlled conditions, the furnaces. Furnaces across the country, military bases, government buildings, research facilities, each one containing a subject, monitored remotely, data collected and analyzed. The perfect prison and laboratory combined. Jake felt sick. "How many are still burning?" "We estimate at least 12, maybe more." Chen stepped closer, and Jake could see the exhaustion etched in his features. "I've spent 15 years tracking them down, trying to understand what was done to these people. What was done to my father." "The woman who approached me," Jake said suddenly. "Agent Morrison. She knew I'd found your father." Sarah Morrison isn't FBI, Chen replied. She's part of a private contractor called Meridian Sciences. They took over the monitoring program in the 1980s when the government wanted to distance itself from direct involvement. She's been tracking me for months. A sound from outside made them both freeze, the low rumble of multiple vehicles approaching. Chen cursed and moved to the windows, peering through the broken glass. 3 SUVs, he whispered. Maybe more. They found us. Jake's heart hammered against his ribs. How? Doesn't matter now. Chen pulled a small device from his pocket, a hard drive no bigger than his thumb. This contains everything: names, locations, financial records, proof that Meridian Sciences has been expanding the program, not shutting it down. Expanding it how? New subjects, homeless people, illegal immigrants, anyone who won't be missed. They've perfected the process. No more failed experiments, no more unstable subjects. Just a steady supply of test cases for whatever sick research they're conducting. The sound of car doors slamming echoed through the night. Chen pressed the drive into Jake's hand. There's a storm drain behind the building. Follow it east for half a mile. It comes out near the old rail yard. From there you can reach the highway. What about you? Chen's smile was grim. Someone needs to buy you time. Make sure this information reaches the right people. He pulled out a tablet, his fingers flying across the screen. I'm uploading everything to a secure server. Insurance policy. Flashlight beams began probing the warehouse entrance. Jake could hear voices, professional and calm. Military precision. Go, Chen whispered urgently, before they seal the exits. Jake clutched the drive and the folder, his mind racing. Everything he thought he knew about his country, his government, had crumbled in the space of a week. Now he was running for his life, carrying secrets that could bring down decades of systematic horror. The voices grew closer. The abandoned warehouse stretched before them like a cathedral of rust and shadows. Jake's flashlight beam cut through the darkness, revealing massive industrial equipment draped in decades of dust. The air tasted of metal and decay, with an underlying chemical sweetness that made his stomach churn. Third one this week, Chen whispered, checking her tablet. All facilities registered under shell companies that trace back to Prometheus Industries. Jake nodded, but his attention was fixed on the familiar hum emanating from deeper within the building. It was the same frequency he'd heard in the furnace room, the same resonance that had preceded everything falling apart. His modified nervous system picked up harmonics that made his teeth ache. They moved carefully through the maze of machinery, following the sound. Sarah's equipment detected electromagnetic anomalies growing stronger with each step. Whatever was here, it was active. Jake Chen's voice carried a warning edge. Motion sensors are picking up movement ahead, multiple contacts. He raised his hand, signaling for quiet. Through the industrial maze, he could see a faint glow painting the far wall amber. The humming intensified, joined by other sounds, mechanical whirring, electronic beeps and something else. Voices. They crept closer, using the massive equipment as cover. The warehouse opened into a vast central space, where Jake's worst fears materialized into reality. Dozens of furnaces lined the walls, each one emanating that eerie glow. But these weren't old municipal units. They were sleek, modern installations connected by a web of cables and monitoring equipment. Men in dark suits moved between the furnaces with practiced efficiency, checking readouts and adjusting controls. At the center of the space, Dr. Elizabeth Hawthorne stood before a bank of monitors, displaying what looked like vital signs: heartbeats, brain activity, metabolic rates. Subjects 17 through 23 are showing accelerated neural integration, she was saying to someone Jake couldn't see. The new catalyst is working better than projected. A chill ran down Jake's spine as he realized what he was looking at. This wasn't just about preserving bodies. They were keeping them alive, conscious. The readings on those monitors belonged to the people burning in the furnaces. Processing time has decreased by 40%, Hawthorne continued. We should be ready for Phase 3 within the month. A figure stepped into view, and Jake's blood turned to ice. Director Morrison's scarred face was illuminated by the monitor glow, his expression one of cold satisfaction. Excellent. The President will be pleased. How many subjects will we need for full implementation? Conservative estimate? 10,000. We'll need to expand operations significantly. 10,000. Jake gripped his flashlight so hard his knuckles went white. Whatever Phase 3 was, it required 10,000 people to burn alive while remaining conscious. Sarah touched his arm, pointing to her tablet. The electromagnetic readings were spiking. Something was happening to the furnaces themselves. The frequency was changing, harmonizing into something that made the air itself seem to vibrate. The resonance field is stabilizing across all units, Hawthorne announced. Beginning collective consciousness test. The monitors around her began displaying synchronized patterns. Brain waves from multiple subjects were aligning, forming a single unified signal that pulsed in rhythm with the furnace's glow. My God, Chen breathed, barely audible. They're networking human consciousness. Morrison nodded approvingly. Show me the interface. Hawthorne typed commands into a console. The unified brainwave pattern shifted, responding to her input. Full neural control achieved. The collective is responding to external commands. Jake watched in horror as the pattern changed with each keystroke. They weren't just preserving consciousness, they were controlling it, turning human minds into components of some vast processing system. What's the maximum range? Morrison asked. Current tests show effective control up to 50 miles. But with the satellite network, range becomes irrelevant. Satellite network. Jake's mind raced through the implications. They could control people anywhere, turning them into a global network of enslaved consciousness. We need to move, Sarah whispered urgently, checking her tablet. Energy levels are spiking. Something's about to happen. But before they could retreat, one of the suited technicians spotted their hiding place. Intruders, Section 7. Alarms began blaring as floodlights blazed to life. Jake grabbed Chen's hand, pulling her behind a massive transformer as gunfire erupted around them. Sarah was already running toward a side exit, her equipment bag bouncing against her hip. This way, Jake shouted over the chaos, leading them through a maze of pipes and machinery. Behind them, Morrison's voice cut through the noise, issuing orders to seal the building and capture the intruders alive. They burst through an emergency exit into the pre-dawn darkness, but their escape was short-lived. Black SUVs were already converging on the warehouse, their headlights sweeping the abandoned industrial district. The car! Chen pointed to where they'd parked 3 blocks away. They ran through the labyrinth of empty buildings, the sound of pursuit growing behind them. Jake's enhanced nervous system was processing every shadow, every sound, mapping escape routes with mechanical precision. But he couldn't shake the image of those synchronized brain waves, the casual discussion of 10,000 subjects, the horrifying efficiency of the operation they'd witnessed. Whatever Prometheus Industries was planning, Phase 3 was about to begin. The abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of Phoenix looked like a dozen others Jake had seen in his desperate flight across state lines. But Dr. Chen's contact had been specific about the location, down to the rusted number barely visible on the corrugated metal siding. Jake checked his watch, 3:47 a.m. He was early. The door opened before he could knock. Martinez? The woman was young, maybe 30, with prematurely grey hair and eyes that darted constantly over his shoulder. I'm Dr. Sarah Voss. Chen said you'd be coming. Jake followed her through a maze of shipping containers that had been converted into makeshift laboratories. The air hummed with the sound of generators and cooling systems. Banks of computer monitors cast blue light across workbenches cluttered with equipment he didn't recognize. What is this place? Sanctuary, Voss said, leading him deeper into the complex. For researchers who ask the wrong questions or find the wrong answers. They passed other figures hunched over microscopes and data terminals, scientists working in self-imposed exile. Jake counted at least a dozen, all focused on their tasks with the intensity of people racing against time. Chen told me about your discovery, Voss continued. The body in the furnace, the thermal anomaly. We've been tracking similar incidents for 7 years. She stopped at a wall covered with photographs, charts, and red string connecting dozens of locations across a map of North America. Jake's breath caught as he recognized some of the images: furnaces, industrial equipment, all bearing the Prometheus logo. 43 sites, Voss explained, all Prometheus installations, all showing the same impossible thermal signatures your body exhibited. Most people would dismiss it as equipment malfunction, but we know better. Jake studied a photograph of a blast furnace in Detroit, another of a crematorium in Seattle. These are all connected to Prometheus, either directly owned or recently retrofitted with their equipment. The pattern emerged gradually, a few degrees here, an unexplained energy reading there, nothing dramatic enough to trigger investigations, but consistent enough to catch our attention. She pulled up a file on a nearby computer. Jake saw his own face staring back at him, a personnel photo from his employee records at the city maintenance department. We've been monitoring Prometheus employees who might stumble across anomalies. Your supervisor's reports indicated you were thorough, observant. When you disappeared after filing that furnace inspection, we knew you'd found something significant. The implications hit Jake like a physical blow. You've been watching me? Protecting you, Voss corrected. The same way we've protected every researcher, technician, and maintenance worker who's gotten too close to the truth. Most don't realize how much danger they're in until it's too late. She gestured to the other scientists working around them. Dr. Yamamoto discovered similar thermal anomalies at a Prometheus facility in California. His lab was raided 3 days later, all his research confiscated. Dr. Mueller found evidence of molecular-level manipulation in tissue samples from a furnace accident in Texas. She barely escaped when armed contractors surrounded her university. Jake felt the weight of surveillance pressing down on him again, that familiar sensation of being watched. But here, surrounded by others who had faced the same paranoia, it felt less suffocating. What exactly is Prometheus doing? Voss exchanged glances with a colleague at a nearby workstation. That's what we're trying to determine. The thermal signatures suggest some kind of controlled fusion at the cellular level, matter being converted to energy at a rate that should be impossible with current technology. She pulled up another screen showing molecular diagrams that meant nothing to Jake. The body you found wasn't just preserved, it was being used as fuel. Human tissue converted to pure energy while maintaining structural integrity. It's like they've found a way to harvest the fundamental forces that hold matter together. But why? What's the point of keeping a body burning for decades? Power, said a new voice from behind them. Jake turned to see Dr. Chen emerging from behind a bank of servers, his face grim. Not just electrical power, though that's part of it. The energy signatures we're detecting suggest something far more profound. They're not just burning human tissue, they're accessing the quantum field that underlies all matter. Chen approached the wall map, pointing to clusters of red pins around major metropolitan areas. If our calculations are correct, Prometheus isn't just running an energy company, they're building a network of quantum extraction points, using human remains as catalysts for a process that could fundamentally alter the nature of reality itself. Jake stared at the map, trying to process the implications. You're talking about some kind of weapon? Or worse, Voss said quietly. The energy patterns suggest they're trying to create controllable tiers in space-time. Imagine being able to manipulate the basic forces of physics, gravity, electromagnetic fields, even time itself, with enough extraction points networked together. She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Jake could see it in the faces around him, brilliant minds confronted with a possibility too terrifying to fully articulate. Somewhere in the distance, a computer alarm began beeping insistently. The sanctuary's lights flickered, and Jake felt that familiar chill of being hunted settling over him once again. The abandoned warehouse stretched endlessly into shadows, its rusted girders disappearing into darkness above. Jake's footsteps echoed hollow against concrete as he followed the GPS coordinates Chen had given him, each step taking him deeper into what felt like a tomb. The air tasted of metal and decay, thick enough to coat his throat. "You're late," a voice called from behind a stack of shipping containers. Dr. Sarah Chen emerged from the maze of industrial debris, her usually pristine lab coat replaced by dark civilian clothes. She looked haggard, her eyes darting constantly toward the warehouse entrances. Behind her came two other figures, a woman Jake didn't recognize and a man whose bearing screamed military even in civilian dress. "This is Director Lisa Hawthorne," Chen said without preamble, "former NSA, and Colonel David Torres, Army Intelligence. They've been investigating Project Lazarus from the inside." Hawthorne stepped forward, her grey hair pulled back severely. "Mr. Martinez, what you discovered has accelerated a timeline we hoped we'd have years to prepare for. The bodies in those furnaces aren't just preserving themselves, they're evolving." Jake's blood ran cold. "Evolving how?" Torres opened a tablet, its blue glow painting angular shadows across his weathered face. 3 days ago, thermal imaging detected movement inside 17 furnaces across the country. Yesterday, we lost contact with the team investigating the Chicago facility. The tablet screen showed grainy security footage from what looked like an underground chamber. Jake watched in horror as a figure emerged from an opened furnace, humanoid but wrong, its movements too fluid, its limbs bending at impossible angles. The timestamp showed the recording was less than 48 hours old. "They're not human anymore," Chen said quietly. "The process that preserved them, it's been changing them, improving them. We think they've been conscious this entire time, aware but unable to move. Until now." Jake's mind reeled. "The man I found, Richardson, is he?" "Gone," Hawthorne said. "The facility was evacuated after you escaped, but when our people arrived, the furnace was empty. No ash, no residue, just gone." The warehouse suddenly felt smaller, the shadows deeper. Jake realized he was gripping the metal detector Chen had insisted he carry, not for hidden doors, but for the metallic implants every Lazarus subject carried. "There's something else," Torres continued, swiping to a new screen. "We've been monitoring communications. They're coordinating. The subjects who've awakened are finding each other, and they're hunting for something. Or someone." The tablet now showed a map dotted with red markers across the United States. Each marker pulsed slowly, like a heartbeat. "Active subjects," Hawthorne explained. "The pattern suggests they're converging on specific locations, research facilities, government installations, and—" She paused, meeting Jake's eyes. "The home addresses of everyone involved in the original program." Jake's stomach dropped. "My family." "Already secured," Torres assured him. "But we need to move fast. Our intelligence suggests they retain their human memories, but with enhanced physical capabilities and something else. A shared consciousness. They know what we know almost as soon as we learn it." Chen pulled out her own device, showing complex DNA structures rotating in three-dimensional space. The preservation process used a synthetic compound that bonded with human cellular structure. We thought it simply prevented decay, but it was actually rewriting their genetic code, optimizing it. After decades of this process, they're becoming something new, Jake finished. "And they blame us for what was done to them," Hawthorne added. "The psychological profiles suggest they view their transformation as both gift and curse. They want revenge, but they also want to complete the process on a larger scale." The metal detector in Jake's hand suddenly erupted in sharp, rapid beeps. Everyone froze. Torres drew his sidearm, gesturing for silence. The beeping continued, growing more insistent. Jake realized the sound wasn't coming from just his device. Similar alarms were echoing from the equipment the others carried. "Multiple contacts," Torres whispered. "They found us." A sound drifted through the warehouse, footsteps, but wrong. Too light, too fast, moving in perfect synchronization. Jake counted at least 6 sets, approaching from different directions. The exits, Hawthorne breathed, but Torres was already shaking his head. Surrounded, he confirmed, checking thermal readings on his tablet. They've been watching us. Chen grabbed Jake's arm. There's a maintenance tunnel system beneath this warehouse. Original building plans show it connects to the storm drains. The synchronized footsteps stopped. The warehouse fell into absolute silence, broken only by the frantic beeping of their detectors. Then a voice called out from the darkness, clear and conversational. "Dr. Chen, we'd like to speak with you about your research." Jake recognized something in that voice. The same measured tone Richardson had used in the furnace recording, but with an underlying harmonic that seemed to vibrate in his bones. "We're not here to harm you," another voice added from a different direction. "We simply want to understand what was done to us, and perhaps share what we've learned." The abandoned warehouse stretched before them like a concrete cathedral, its skeletal rafters disappearing into shadow. Jake's flashlight beam cut through the darkness, revealing dust motes dancing in the stale air. Beside him, Dr. Sarah Chen checked her equipment readings while Marcus Torres kept watch at the entrance, his hand resting on the pistol beneath his jacket. "The electromagnetic signature is strongest about 50 yards ahead," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible above the distant hum of city traffic. "Whatever they're hiding here, it's big." Jake's stomach churned as they moved deeper into the facility. 3 days had passed since they'd escaped the government safehouse, 3 days of following breadcrumbs left by Dr. Elena Vasquez before her disappearance. Each clue had led them closer to the truth about Project Prometheus, and Jake was beginning to understand why people were dying to keep it secret. The furnace at the power plant had been just the beginning. The body he'd found, perfectly preserved despite decades of burning, wasn't an anomaly. It was a prototype. "There," Sarah breathed, pointing ahead to where a faint blue glow emanated from behind a wall of industrial equipment. "That's it." They approached carefully, Jake's maintenance worker instincts automatically cataloguing the machinery they passed. Most of it was standard: generators, ventilation systems, electrical panels. But interspersed among the familiar equipment were devices he didn't recognize, sleek constructions of metal and glass that hummed with barely contained energy. The source of the blue light revealed itself as they rounded a massive air conditioning unit. Set into the warehouse floor was a circular chamber, perhaps 20 feet across, its transparent walls glowing with an otherworldly radiance. Inside, suspended in what appeared to be a column of pure energy, floated 3 human figures. "Jesus Christ," Marcus muttered, finally joining them after ensuring they weren't followed. "Are they alive?" Sarah was already scanning the chamber with her instruments, her face pale in the blue glow. "According to these readings, they're not just alive, they're in a state of temporal suspension. Their biological processes are running at approximately 1/10,000th normal speed." Jake stared at the figures, recognition dawning with horrible clarity. "I know her," he said, pointing to the woman floating nearest to them. "That's Dr. Martinez from the research facility. She went missing 8 months ago." "And him," Sarah added, indicating a middle-aged man in a lab coat. "Dr. William Chen, my predecessor at the university. He supposedly died in a car accident last year." The implications hit Jake like a physical blow. They're not dead. They're being stored. A slow clap echoed through the warehouse, causing all 3 to spin around. Director Walsh emerged from the shadows, flanked by 6 armed agents in tactical gear. The man who'd orchestrated Jake's recruitment looked older now, his face drawn with exhaustion or perhaps guilt. "Very good, Mr. Martinez. Storage is indeed the operative term." Walsh stepped closer, his agents maintaining their positions but not yet raising their weapons, though I prefer to think of it as preservation. These individuals possessed knowledge that was inconvenient to certain ongoing operations. "You're monsters," Marcus snarled, his hand moving toward his gun before stopping as red laser dots appeared on his chest. Walsh shook his head sadly. "We're patriots, Mr. Torres. When Dr. Vasquez stumbled onto the quantum preservation technology hidden in those old Nazi files, we faced a choice: allow foreign governments to acquire it or secure it for America's protection. By murdering innocent people? Sarah demanded. By ensuring they couldn't share what they'd learned with our enemies. Walsh's voice hardened. The technology you see before you represents a quantum leap in human understanding. The ability to preserve consciousness indefinitely, to store human knowledge in a state of temporal suspension. Imagine the applications for intelligence gathering, for preserving our greatest minds. Jake felt sick as the full scope of the conspiracy became clear. The body in the furnace, that was an early experiment, wasn't it? You were trying to perfect the process. Subject 0. The preservation field wasn't properly calibrated, so he remained conscious during the burning. Unfortunate, but necessary for our research. Walsh checked his watch impatiently. You've seen enough. Dr. Chen, your expertise will be invaluable in refining the process. As for you, gentlemen. The warehouse suddenly plunged into darkness as the power grid failed. Emergency lighting flickered on, casting everything in hellish red shadows. In the confusion, Jake heard Marcus shout something about the building's electrical system. "Now!" Sarah yelled, and Jake realized she'd somehow triggered an overload in the preservation chamber. The blue glow was intensifying, becoming almost blinding, and the floating figures inside were beginning to move as their temporal suspension destabilized. Gunfire erupted as Walsh's agents opened fire in the strobing light. Jake dove behind a generator, his mind racing. He'd spent his entire career maintaining complex systems, understanding how they could fail. And right now, failure was exactly what they needed. He spotted the main power coupling for the preservation system and made his choice, knowing that whatever happened next would change everything. The abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of Denver felt like stepping into a tomb. Jake's breath came out in visible puffs as he followed Dr. Chen through the maze of covered equipment, their footsteps echoing off concrete walls that had seen better decades. The flashlight beams cut through darkness thick enough to taste, revealing glimpses of machinery that looked both ancient and impossibly advanced. "This is what's left of Project Lazarus," Chen whispered, pulling a tarp away from what looked like a massive furnace, but wrong somehow. The metal gleamed with an otherworldly sheen, and symbols that hurt to look at directly were etched into its surface. After the incident in '73, they scattered the research. Some went underground, some went to space. Jake's throat went dry. The furnace looked exactly like the one in his building's basement, down to the strange markings he'd assumed were manufacturer's specifications. "How many of these things are there?" "Dozens, maybe hundreds." Chen's voice carried the weight of decades of guilt. Each one a gateway, a testing ground. "The bodies you found weren't victims, Jake. They were volunteers. People dying of terminal illnesses, soldiers wounded beyond repair. We promised them immortality." The cold air seemed to press against Jake's skin as he processed this. "And instead you gave them eternal burning." The process was supposed to last only hours. The consciousness would transfer to a new body, enhanced, perfected. But something went wrong with the dimensional anchor. Chen moved to another covered shape, revealing banks of computers that belonged in a science fiction movie. The subjects became trapped between states, not quite dead, not quite alive, existing in a realm where our physics break down. Agent Morrison stepped out of the shadows, her weapon drawn but lowered. Jake spun around, adrenaline spiking, but she held up a hand. "I'm not here to stop you. I'm here because my partner is in one of those furnaces." The admission hit like a physical blow. Jake stared at her, seeing her differently now, the haunted look in her eyes, the way she'd hesitated when they first met. Agent Crawford. 3 years ago, pancreatic cancer, stage 4. The organization offered him a chance. Her voice cracked slightly. "I thought he was getting experimental treatment overseas. I found out the truth 6 months later, but by then the program was classified beyond my clearance level." Chen was powering up the ancient computers, their screens flickering to life with readouts that made Jake's head spin. The dimensional barriers have been weakening. What we're seeing now, the increased activity, the body's becoming more aware. It's not random. Something on the other side is pushing back. Other side of what? Jake demanded, though part of him dreaded the answer. Reality itself. The old scientist's fingers danced over keyboards that looked like they belonged in a NASA mission control. We punched holes in the fabric of existence, Jake, and something noticed. The screens began displaying what looked like anatomical diagrams, but wrong. Bodies twisted through impossible angles, existing in dimensions that shouldn't be possible. Jake recognized the face in one of the images, the construction worker from his building's furnace. Marcus Holloway, Morrison said, reading over his shoulder. Volunteered in 1987 after a construction accident left him paralyzed. His family thinks he died in the hospital. Can we get them out? The question burst from Jake before he could stop it. Can we bring them back? Chen's hands stilled on the keyboard. That's what we're here to find out. But Jake, you need to understand. If we succeed, if we open those dimensional anchors, we're not just freeing the trapped subjects. We're potentially letting something else through. The temperature in the warehouse seemed to drop another 10 degrees. Jake pulled his jacket tighter, but the cold was coming from inside now, a chill that went bone deep. What kind of something else? The entities that have been feeding on their suffering for decades. Chen turned to face them, and in the glow of the computer screens, he looked like a man preparing for his own execution. The consciousness trapped in those furnaces, they've been sustaining something vast and hungry, something that exists in the spaces between dimensions. Morrison stepped closer to the screens, her cop instincts taking over. Show me the building schematics. If these furnaces are connected somehow, there has to be a pattern. As Chen pulled up building layouts from across the country, Jake saw it. Dozens of red dots marking furnace locations, forming a geometric pattern that stretched from coast to coast. At the center, pulsing like a heartbeat, was his building in downtown Denver. It's a summoning circle, he breathed. The whole damn country is a summoning circle. Chen nodded grimly. And tomorrow night, during the lunar eclipse, the final phase begins. Unless we can shut it down from the inside. Jake looked at the screen showing Marcus Holloway's twisted form, existing in agony between worlds, and made his decision. Then we go back to the furnace, tonight. The quantum field generator hummed with an otherworldly resonance that made Jake's teeth ache. Dr. Chen's fingers danced across holographic controls that materialized from thin air, each gesture causing ripples of energy to cascade through the laboratory's containment field. The preserved body, patient zero, as Chen had called it, floated in the center of the chamber, suspended in a web of crackling energy that bent light around it like a lens. The human nervous system, Chen explained, his voice barely audible over the machine's growing intensity, is essentially a biological quantum computer. Every thought, every memory, every emotion creates microscopic fluctuations in the quantum field. Most people's consciousness dissipates upon death, but some individuals, roughly 1 in 10 million, possess neural pathways that can maintain quantum coherence indefinitely. Jake watched in horrified fascination as tendrils of energy began emerging from the body's cranium, writhing like luminescent snakes in the charged air. You're saying this person is still conscious? After burning for 40 years? Conscious, yes. Aware, certainly, but experiencing existence on a level we can barely comprehend. Chen's eyes reflected the dancing lights. The Black Site project wasn't just about creating super soldiers, Jake. It was about harvesting the ultimate renewable resource, human consciousness itself. The energy tendrils suddenly snapped toward Jake with predatory intent. He stumbled backward, but not before one of the ghostly appendages brushed against his forehead. The contact sent a surge of alien thoughts flooding into his mind, fragments of memory that weren't his own. A woman's face twisted with terror, laboratory corridors that stretched into impossible geometries. The sensation of burning alive while remaining perfectly aware. Oh my God, Jake gasped, pressing his palms against his temples. She's trying to communicate. They all try eventually. Chen's voice carried a note of weary resignation. That's how we discovered the phenomenon. The first test subject began influencing electronic equipment through sheer force of will. Security cameras would turn to watch personnel. Computer terminals would display messages that seemed to come from nowhere. The military saw potential in weaponizing disembodied consciousness. The laboratory shuddered as something massive moved through the facility above them. Emergency lights began strobing red, casting everything in hellish shadows. Through the observation windows, Jake could see armed figures in hazmat suits taking positions throughout the complex. "They've found us," Chen muttered, his hands working frantically at the controls. "I need more time to complete the extraction protocol." Extraction protocol? The only way to end their suffering is to sever their connection to the quantum field. But if we do it wrong, the consciousness could disperse into the electromagnetic grid. Imagine 40 years of accumulated torment suddenly released into every computer network, every cell tower, every satellite on Earth. Another wave of foreign memories crashed over Jake as more energy tendrils made contact. This time, he saw the truth of Dr. Chen's role in the project. Not a reluctant participant, but its architect. The quantum field generator was his design. The containment protocols bore his signature. The screaming minds trapped in endless burning were his creation. "You're one of them," Jake snarled, backing away despite the energy field's pull on his consciousness. "You built this hell." Chen's mask of scientific detachment finally cracked, revealing something broken and desperate underneath. "I thought I was advancing human knowledge. The military told us we were developing next-generation communication systems. By the time I realized what we'd actually created, there were already dozens of subjects trapped in the quantum matrix." The facility's main door exploded inward. Black-armored soldiers poured through the breach, their weapons trained on the quantum field generator. Behind them strode a figure Jake recognized with a chill, Director Morrison, the woman who'd been orchestrating the cover-up from the beginning. "Dr. Chen," Morrison called out, her voice cutting through the machine's resonance. "Step away from the controls. Project Lazarus is being terminated." "You can't shut it down like this," Chen shouted back. "The consciousness dispersal will—" Morrison's response was to signal her soldiers. A hail of bullets shredded the quantum field generator's control console in a shower of sparks and twisted metal. The containment field wavered, its perfect geometric patterns dissolving into chaos. Jake felt the change immediately, dozens of disembodied minds suddenly pressing against his consciousness with desperate urgency. Through their collective voice, he understood the terrible truth. The quantum field wasn't just preserving their awareness, it was broadcasting it. Every person who'd ever had unusual thoughts after visiting government facilities, every unexplained phenomenon near military installations, every electronic ghost in the machine, they were all echoes of the trapped consciousness trying to break free. As the field collapsed entirely, Jake's last coherent thought before the psychic tsunami hit was a prayer that somewhere in the chaos of 40 years accumulated human suffering, there might still be enough compassion left to forgive what had been done in science's name. The lights went out, and in the darkness, something vast and angry began to wake up. Jake's hands trembled as he stared at the quantum resonance field generator humming in the center of the abandoned laboratory. The machine that had kept those bodies burning for decades sat before him like a malevolent altar, its crystalline core pulsing with an otherworldly light that made his teeth ache. "We need to shut it down," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible over the machine's subsonic thrum. She clutched the stolen research files against her chest, pages of equations and diagrams that detailed horrors beyond imagination. Dr. Chen moved closer to the control panel, his face pale but determined. "The resonance cascade is already beginning. Look at the readings. The field is expanding exponentially. If we don't stop this now, it won't just be a few test subjects trapped between dimensions, it could affect the entire city." Jake watched the numbers climb on the display screens surrounding them. Energy levels that should have been impossible were becoming reality. The air itself seemed to shimmer, and he caught glimpses of shadows that moved independently of their sources. The boundary between their world and whatever lay beyond was wearing thin. A distant explosion echoed through the facility, followed by the sound of boots on metal flooring. Agent Morrison's security teams had found them. Jake estimated they had minutes before this room would be flooded with armed operatives who would shoot first and classify the bodies later. There, Chen pointed to a series of manual override switches protected by reinforced glass. Emergency shutdown protocol, but someone needs to stay here to complete the sequence. The quantum field will resist any attempt to collapse it. It's become self-sustaining. Sarah grabbed Jake's arm. "What aren't you telling us, Doctor?" Chen's expression crumpled. "The shutdown requires a conscious observer to maintain quantum coherence during the collapse. Without it, the field could invert instead of dissipating. The person operating the controls," he swallowed hard, "they'll be caught in the resonance feedback. There's no way to shield against it." Another explosion, closer this time. Emergency lighting flickered on as the main power grid fluctuated. Through the laboratory's reinforced windows, Jake could see military vehicles surrounding the building. Morrison wasn't taking any chances. They were planning to contain this by any means necessary. "I'll do it," Jake said, stepping toward the control panel. "This whole thing started when I opened that furnace. It's my responsibility to end it." "No," Sarah's voice was firm. "You don't understand the science well enough. One wrong sequence and you could make things worse." She looked at Chen. "Talk me through it, step by step." "Neither of you understands," Chen interrupted. "Morrison will never let this end. Even if we shut down this generator, there are others. Facilities like this exist in 12 locations across the country. This was always meant to be just the beginning." The laboratory door exploded inward, and smoke grenades rolled across the floor. Through the haze, Jake saw the red dots of laser sights sweeping the room. Morrison's voice echoed through a megaphone from the hallway. "Stand down immediately. You're interfering with matters of national security." Jake smashed the glass covering the emergency controls as armed figures moved through the doorway. Sarah was already at the computer terminal, her fingers flying over the keyboard as she input Chen's shutdown commands. The quantum field generator's hum rose to a painful whine. "Field resonance destabilizing," Chen called out, reading from another display. "Sarah, you need to manually adjust the frequency dampeners." The blue switches, left to right sequence. Gunfire erupted as the security team advanced. Jake dove behind the equipment rack, pulling Chen with him. Bullets sparked off metal surfaces and shattered glass instruments. The quantum field began to pulse erratically, sending waves of distortion through the air that made reality itself seem uncertain. Sarah worked frantically at the controls, her movements becoming increasingly frantic as the feedback intensified. The air around her began to shimmer with the same effect Jake had seen around the burning bodies. She was being caught in the field collapse. "Sarah, get away from there!" Jake lunged toward her, but Chen held him back. "If she stops now, the cascade will reverse. The field will expand beyond our ability to contain it." Through the chaos of gunfire and alarms, Jake watched Sarah's form begin to flicker. Parts of her seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously, creating a horrifying kaleidoscope effect. But her hands never stopped moving across the controls. The quantum generator's whine reached a crescendo, then suddenly cut to silence. The crystalline core went dark, and the oppressive weight that had filled the air dissipated like morning fog. Sarah collapsed to the floor, her body solid and real once more. Morrison stepped through the smoke, his weapon trained on Jake. "You have no idea what you've just done. Those people were volunteers, test subjects for the most important research project in human history." Jake helped Sarah to her feet, relief flooding through him as he felt her solid, warm presence. What research could possibly justify this? Morrison's smile was cold as winter steel. "Immortality, Mr. Martinez, and you've just set us back 20 years. The underground facility stretched deeper than Jake had imagined possible. Emergency lighting cast eerie shadows as he followed Dr. Sarah Chen through corridors lined with containment units, each one humming with an energy that made his teeth ache. Behind reinforced glass, he glimpsed horrors that defied explanation. Bodies in various states of preservation, some burning like the one he'd found in the furnace, others suspended in impossible geometric patterns that hurt to look at directly. The Phoenix Project began in 1952, Sarah explained, her voice echoing off the metal walls. We thought we were studying spontaneous human combustion, trying to understand why some people burned without cause. But we discovered something far worse. Jake's hand instinctively moved to the data drive in his pocket, the evidence he'd gathered from the surface facility. Worse how? Sarah stopped before a massive vault door. Her security badge trembled as she held it to the scanner. We weren't studying victims of the phenomenon. We were creating them. The vault opened with a pneumatic hiss, revealing a command center that belonged in a science fiction nightmare. Banks of monitors displayed vital signs, brain activity patterns, and thermal readings from dozens of subjects. But what drew Jake's attention was the central display, a map of the United States dotted with red points, each one pulsing like a heartbeat. Each dot represents an active subject, Sarah said, noticing his stare. People who've been infected with the Phoenix pathogen. They burn, but they can't die. They experience the agony of immolation while their consciousness remains trapped in their bodies. That's impossible, Jake whispered, though he knew he was looking at the proof. The pathogen rewrites cellular structure at the quantum level. It creates a feedback loop where the subject's bioelectric field sustains the burning process while preventing actual tissue destruction. They're caught in an eternal moment of death. A new voice cut through the air like a blade. Dr. Chen, I thought we agreed you were going to wait for authorization before bringing our guest down here. Jake spun around to see Director Harrison emerging from the shadows, flanked by two guards in hazmat suits. The older man's face was calm, almost paternal, but his eyes held the cold calculation Jake had seen in the security footage. The authorization was taking too long, Sarah replied, stepping protectively in front of Jake. He deserves to know the truth. Harrison smiled, the expression never reaching his eyes. The truth, yes. Mr. Martinez, you've been quite the problem for us. Breaking into secure facilities, stealing classified data, asking uncomfortable questions. But perhaps that persistence makes you perfect for what comes next. I'm not doing anything for you, Jake said, his hand moving toward the concealed weapons Sarah had given him. Oh, but you already have. Harrison gestured to the monitors around them. Every minute you've spent in this facility, you've been breathing air saturated with Phoenix spores. The pathogen is already integrating with your cellular structure. Jake felt the world tilt. Sarah's face had gone white. You said the containment protocols were suspended an hour ago, Harrison finished. We needed to test the airborne delivery system eventually. Mr. Martinez's arrival provided the perfect opportunity. The burning sensation started in Jake's chest, a warmth that quickly became uncomfortable heat. He looked down to see steam rising from his skin. What did you do to me? Gave you eternal life, Harrison said. Of a sort. The Phoenix pathogen doesn't kill, it transforms. You'll burn forever, completely aware, experiencing every moment of agony while serving a higher purpose. What purpose? Jake gasped, the heat intensifying. Harrison gestured to the map of pulsing red dots. Each Phoenix subject generates a unique quantum signature. When we have enough of them positioned across the globe, we can create a resonance cascade that will rewrite the laws of thermodynamics in our favor. Unlimited energy derived from human suffering. Sarah lunged for the emergency shutdown, but the guards restrained her. You're insane, she screamed. The feedback could tear apart reality itself. Progress requires sacrifice, Harrison replied calmly. Mr. Martinez is about to become part of something magnificent. The burning was spreading now, Jake's skin glowing with an inner fire that didn't consume. The pain was beyond description, but his mind remained crystal clear. In that clarity, he realized Harrison had made one crucial mistake. Jake still had the data drive and, more importantly, the Deadman switch Sarah had helped him set up. If his biometrics flatlined, every piece of evidence they'd gathered would automatically upload to news networks, government watchdogs, and international human rights organizations. Harrison's plan required secrecy to succeed. "You're going to shut this down," Jake said through gritted teeth, his words accompanied by small puffs of flame. "Because if you don't, the whole world will know what you've done here." Harrison's smile faltered. "That would be unfortunate for everyone involved." "Then we understand each other," Jake replied, his body now wreathed in fire that burned without destroying. "Now let's discuss terms." The facility's emergency lights cast everything in hellish red as Jake sprinted down the corridor, the quantum resonance device clutched against his chest like a lifeline. Behind him, the screaming of twisted metal and the inhuman wails of the hybrid experiments grew louder. The entire underground complex was coming apart at the seams. "The main elevator's compromised." Sarah's voice crackled through his earpiece. "I'm rerouting you to the service shaft in Section C." Jake skidded around a corner, his boots slipping on debris scattered across the floor. Through the chaos, he could hear Dr. Chen's voice echoing from the facility's PA system. "All units, converge on the primary lab. The subject must not reach the surface." The subject. Even now, they couldn't bring themselves to use his name. A massive explosion rocked the facility, and Jake was thrown against the wall. Sparks showered from overhead conduits as the lights flickered. In the momentary darkness, he saw them. Dozens of pale figures emerging from the shadows, their eyes glowing with that familiar amber light. The other test subjects, freed from whatever containment had held them. They moved with fluid, inhuman grace, and Jake realized with growing horror that they weren't trying to stop him. They were flowing around him, past him, heading for the upper levels, heading for the surface. "Jake, whatever's happening down there, it's affecting the quantum field readings across the entire city." Sarah's voice was tight with panic. "We're seeing reality distortions appearing in downtown Phoenix." The service shaft was just ahead, its heavy door standing open. Jake dove through as another explosion sent shockwaves through the complex. The maintenance ladder stretched up into darkness, and he began climbing, the resonance device making his ascent awkward and desperate. Halfway up, the ladder shuddered. Below him, something was climbing, but the rhythmic clanging didn't sound like footsteps. It sounded like claws on metal. Jake climbed faster, his lungs burning. The device in his arms hummed with increasing intensity, its alien geometries seeming to shift and flow in his peripheral vision. He didn't dare look directly at it. Every time he did, he felt his sanity slip a little further. "I'm seeing news reports," Sarah said, her voice breaking up with static. "People are calling in about impossible things. Time moving backwards, buildings that exist and don't exist simultaneously." "Jake, what did they do down there?" "They broke reality," Jake gasped, hauling himself up another rung. "The experiments, the endless burning, the quantum manipulation, they created a weakness in the fabric of space-time itself." The clanging below was getting closer. Jake risked a glance down and immediately wished he hadn't. The thing climbing after him had once been human, but the experiments had changed it into something else. Its elongated limbs moved with spider-like precision, and where its face should have been was a swirling vortex of amber light. The top of the shaft appeared above him, a circle of natural light that looked impossibly beautiful after the artificial hell below. Jake grabbed the edge and hauled himself up into what appeared to be a maintenance building. Through grimy windows he could see the Phoenix skyline, but something was wrong with it. Buildings flickered between architectural styles, some appearing to exist in multiple time periods simultaneously. "The resonance device," Jake said into his earpiece. "How do I activate it?" "According to the files we recovered, you need to—" Sarah's voice cut out as the thing from below burst through the shaft opening. It landed with inhuman grace, its eyeless face turning toward Jake with predatory focus. "You cannot stop what has already begun." It spoke with a voice like grinding glass. "We have been burning for so long, and now the fire spreads to everything." Jake backed toward the door, the device growing heavier in his arms. The burning wasn't torture, he realized aloud. It was incubation. You were gestating something. The creature's mouth opened impossibly wide, revealing row upon row of teeth that seemed to extend into dimensional space. The old reality was so limiting, so small. We are making room for something larger. Outside, the sky began to crack like broken glass. Jake found the activation sequence by instinct rather than knowledge, his fingers tracing patterns that hurt to perceive directly. The device responded with a sound like the universe taking a deep breath. "I'm sorry," he whispered, not sure if he was speaking to the creature, to Sarah, or to the world that was about to change forever. The creature lunged as Jake pressed the final sequence. Light exploded outward, not the amber corruption of the experiments, but something clean and pure and terrible. The creature screamed as it was caught in the wave, its form dissolving like smoke in a hurricane. The cracks in reality snapped shut with sounds like thunder. Through the fading light, Jake saw the city returning to normal, the impossible architectures settling back into familiar forms. The conspiracy was over, the experiments had ended. But as Jake collapsed, the device crumbling to ash in his hands, he wondered what price they'd all pay for healing a wounded reality.